Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the International Center Goa's program, Kitaab, Books and Discussion. We have with us Dr. Naushad Forbes with his book, The Struggle and the Promise, Restoring India's Potential, which was released earlier this year by HarperCollins in January 2022. First of all, before the introduction, Dr. Forbes, Naushad, welcome to ICG's Kitaab. We are privileged to have you here with us. And of course, the second thing is congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much, Pushkar. It's great to be with you. And as we were saying just now, I wish it was in person.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
So a quick introduction first. Dr. Naushad Forbes is co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, India's leading process and energy efficiency firm. Forbes Marshall has consistently ranked as a great place to work and aspires to be a multinational with Indian roots. Dr. Forbes received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees from Stanford University, where he was also an occasional lecturer for about 17 years, a lecturer and consulting professor. And he developed courses on technology in newly industrializing countries. Dr. Forbes is chairman, Ananta Aspen Center and Center for Technology, Innovation, and Economic Research, CTIER. He is also on the board of several educational institutions and public companies. He has for long been an active member of Confederation of Indian Industries, CII, and was its president in 2016-17. The Struggle and the Promise, I have to tell you, Naushad, Dr. Forbes, it was a very, very enjoyable read. But it's kind of a difficult book to discuss, and I'll just explain why. Reason is, The Struggle and the Promise discusses a very wide range of topics. And for me, the challenge while reading the book and thinking about this book discussion was, all right, so which are the 3, 4, 5 areas in which I'll focus on? So I came across this interview you had with India Spend recently, and I said, okay, I can leave most of that out, and the economy, employment, jobs, although I do have a couple of questions around jobs and employment. So in today's session, some of my own interests on some topics are behind the questions you'll come across. So one is the larger question of the role of the state, in a nation's economy. More specific issues, jobs and employment linked to job creation, availability of jobs, and the mismatch that exists between the jobs that are available and the skills of potential job seekers. The third, of course, is something you have been attached to for a long time: higher education. Right? It's something which is very close to my own interests as well. Now, talking about all three will require, dealing for you with the central thrust of the book, which is how leadership in the spheres of economy, institutions, and culture can help India lead the world. It's a slightly different question from the one that people in international relations have been asking, which is, can India be a great power? What can possibly happen? Whether in terms of economy, whether in terms of military power. I think this is a slightly different question, where you do not have to be a great power to be leading the world, in a sense. And you say that small countries like Singapore perhaps are not in that kind of position. But we'll get to that later. Now, question one, which is, first, in a more abstract fashion, what role do you see for the state in a modern 21st century economy? And how would you contrast it in the case of India with the actual role that the state plays in the economy?
So, first of all, I think the role of the state is one of those themes that runs all the way through the book, Pushkar. So I'm delighted that you picked up on that as one of our areas of focus, because it's actually one of the, I think, greatest areas of potential for us as a country, and also one of the areas where we struggle the most when we get the role of the state wrong. And I think particularly when we talk about higher education later on, getting the role of the state right is actually the way in which we can achieve our potential in higher education. So we'll come back to that, I'm sure, in a bit. But if I had to say, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for India, as you ask, to get the role of the state right? I argue very much in the book, and I'm not the only one arguing this, that India has limited state capacity. It particularly has limited state capacity in terms of implementation. We have the ability to formulate policy, to formulate very, in fact, intelligent, forward-looking schemes. But the way those intelligent, forward-looking schemes actually end up getting implemented on the ground, either because of gaps in state governments, or because of gaps in local governments, or because of gaps in the union government, but at lower levels, the implementation leaves much to be lacking, and you actually end up not delivering on the objectives of the scheme. So the argument that I make is recognize the fact that we have limited state capacity. Don't try to say, we must fix it. Yes, we must fix it. Yes, we must work on it. But just recognize the fact that we have limited state capacity. Given that we have limited state capacity, let's focus that limited capacity on those few things, only few things, 6 things actually, that only the state can do. And by doing those 6 things, let's do them well, much better than we do them today, and leave the rest to the private sector, leave the rest to NGOs to actually deliver where in another country, the state might play a bigger role. So it's not a unique argument. Vijay Kelkar and Ajay Shah make this argument very persuasively in their recent book, and I use that extensively in my own book. But I think it's a very important point for us to get right. That our expectations of the state should be limited, but we should expect that the state deliver well in a few areas. What are those areas? As we cover in the book, we should deliver well in the areas of public education, so particularly school education, in the areas of public health. We saw how lacking we were in our handling of the pandemic over these last 2 years. Third, in the area of the police and criminal justice, in the areas of the court system, in the areas of financial regulation, and then in the tax system. These are the 6 things. The Kelkar and Shah book suggests 4 of them. I added public health and public education to their list. And I think these are the 6 things that we need to really do well as a state, and leave the rest to the private sector and to private individuals getting together in NGOs.
Thank you, Naushad. The second question is, again, something which your book doesn't quite deal with, but something which has been, which people have written about extensively, which is that it is perhaps fair to say that contemporary India, and by which I simply mean India since the 1990s, inherited an anti-business and anti-industry culture. The idea of profit itself, was frowned upon. Now, that anti-business culture has, again, arguably weakened over the past 3 decades.
Yes.
But without going into the argument that some of that anti-business sentiment that you have is justified or not, without going into that at all, how has that culture harmed the growth of Indian industry and the cause of economic growth since the 90s in contemporary India, the persistence of that culture?
So, you're exactly right that this started to change only in one could argue that it started to change a bit in the 80s, but it really started to change in a significant way only from the 1991 reforms onwards. And actually, Manmohan Singh in his July 1991 budget very clearly articulated a change in the way in which business should be regarded and the respect that it should be given as the primary driver of economic activity. And since then, we have been getting better, but there is a legacy that we still deal with. This legacy does still show up in 2 ways. It shows up in, I think, a hangover in how the state sees industry, and it shows up in how the industry regards government. So how the state sees industry, I think the state still sees its role as being one of setting all the rules, deciding what's right for the economy, and expecting industry to fall in place and follow and do certain things consistent with that. And you see this in the way in which we in more recent years have had schemes like the PLI scheme and so on, where the state is making choices about what the right product is to make and how much of the right product and what technology and so on. And on the other side, from industry, I think the legacy has continued in terms of looking to the state for support, incentives, protection, sanction, which I think is not called for. When you have an independent private sector that's the dynamo of the economy, it should be much more independent of the government than it is. And when things go wrong, we should look inward at what we need to correct ourselves, and not to the government to rescue us, not to the government to protect us. And in the same way, the government should look at industry and say, we respect them, they're independent, but if a private company, Jet Airways, Kingfisher, fails, it's failed. Let it go out of business. The government has no role. I mean, it's a private company that's borrowed money commercially. It's gone out of business. Let it fail. What's the role? Why does the state have to step in and do something? And I think expectations of the state that it should step in are wrong, and expectations of the state that it should step in on itself are wrong.
So if we include a third actor there, society, so if you look at government, business, and society, the kind of relationship you have between them, I mean, there's a complete, no, say a complete would be an exaggeration, but there is a lack of trust based on the legacy, the inheritance.
I agree.
What do you think can change that?
So we need to, there are two things that need to change. I mean, the perception needs to change, but I think also there's a need for change in reality. So I'll give you the example that I used in my book is there's a CI code of ethical conduct, which says compliance with all laws. It's a very simple code. It's a one-page code. It's simple enough for every company, small and large, to actually follow. And many companies in India actually have gone much further. If you look at the Tata Code of Conduct, for example, it's much more extensive, much more demanding. But we purposely wanted to put together a minimum simple code that any company of whatever size could follow. Too few CI members have signed up for it. Roughly just under 1,000 members out of a total membership of 9,000. So now part of it is getting everyone to know that it exists so that everyone signs up for it, etc. But part of it is that there is this sort of this view that, well, why do I need to? And I think some of these things send messages to society that actually industry, the great bulk of industry is compliant. The great bulk of industry tries to do a good job. The great bulk of industry tries to operate in an honest way and tries to provide a good product and a good service that consumers choose to buy. I think getting that message across is a responsibility for us in industry. I think it starts at home, and it's up to us to really convey that industry is broadly a force for good. I think also that what tends to happen is that a few bad eggs, some scam or the other, a Mehul Choksi or a Nirav Modi or even if you take, say, Kingfisher, and you have a few of those examples that receive a great deal of visibility, and it colors all of industry. And some of that is a perception problem, but some of that is real as well. It's so I think there's a need to set one's own house in order and then be very clear that, look, all sectors have their bad eggs. You see this in NGOs, for example, and then we make laws to restrict FCRA funding, and to be very restrictive about what NGOs can do and where they can operate and who they can get funds from and so on. And again, we're making laws to suit the dishonest. We should be making laws to suit the 90-some% that are honest.
get to the point about unemployment, employment, but also in a larger sense, we often look at economic growth rates. How fast is India growing, or how fast are we growing faster than China or not? And these days we often look at unemployment numbers, or are enough jobs being created? Now, I think there are two key issues there, and you have talked about both in the India Spend interview as well as in your book. The first one is, of course, whether India is creating enough number of jobs, and if whether or not, I mean, what kind of jobs are being created. That's one. The second is, of course, when I mentioned earlier that there's clearly a big and a big mismatch between the jobs that are there, whether they are being created or they are just available, and the skills of the applicants, the people who are looking for jobs. So you have public sector jobs for which lakhs of people actually end up applying, and you have jobs that may be available, but either people don't want to be working in the private sector, for example, or they do not have the skills or the qualifications to be able to carry out those jobs. Where do you see this larger problem of jobs, employability of those looking for jobs, and so on?
So as your question implied, we have to address both demand and supply. So we have to address the quality of demand, what kind of jobs are being made available, and we have to address supply in terms of the quality of skills and education that people bring to bear for those jobs. So start with demand. I think it's wrong to expect the state to provide jobs. That's not the role of the state. The state can provide some direct jobs through infrastructure, spending, and so on. But its main role is to enable job creation. Now, how does the state enable job creation? It enables job creation more fundamentally through general economic activity than anything else. So if we have the right policies in place that lead to high economic growth, we will end up creating larger numbers of jobs. It's true of every country. It's true of our own history and experience in these last 30 years. Now, the quality of those jobs is not given. That's not something you can take for granted. For various reasons, manufacturing in our country has tended to create relatively few jobs. Totally, out of a workforce of 400 million people, manufacturing, according to the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, which has, I think, the best data in the area, manufacturing accounts for about 30 million out of those 400 million jobs. So a very small proportion, less than 10% of all employment in the country. The great bulk of employment in the country is agriculture, 120 million jobs. And then a bunch of informal services in our cities. So retail, 70 million jobs. I mean, twice as many jobs as manufacturing. And when we're talking about these retail jobs, we're not talking about people working in large shops and shopping malls. We're talking about people who are employed in small roadside stalls, who are employed maybe in a very informal way as cleaners, as helpers, as delivery boys. This is the kind of mass employment that has actually developed in these last 30 years particularly. Now, these informal jobs are not good quality jobs in one important respect. They're not jobs where we know how to grow productivity in the long run. In manufacturing, we do. And if you know how to grow productivity, then you have this dynamo for growth in the long run. For jobs as security guards or drivers or delivery boys, growing productivity is much more problematic. We don't know really how to do that. Yeah. So that's the demand side. So we need to find ways of creating millions of good quality jobs, which I think will require manufacturing to a much greater, labor-intensive manufacturing to a much greater extent than we've actually succeeded with so far. And second, I think tourism and tourism potential. I mean, a great example is Goa. right? Where unfortunately for me, I'm not, and fortunately for you, you are, right? So if you look at Goa and you look at how Goa has changed in these last 30, 40 years, 30 years ago, Goa was a net supplier of people to the rest of the country. The chances are that in Bombay, if you employed a cook, the cook would be from Goa, right? The chances are that if you went to a hotel in Delhi, people working in the hotel would very often be from Goa. What do you find today? First of all the many of the people from Goa have moved back to Goa because there have been employment opportunities at home. And second, what do you find in Goa? You find people from all over the country who come there for work, from neighboring states, from Maharashtra and Karnataka, of course, but also from across the country, from UP and Bihar and so on, right? So Goa, driven by tourism, has become an employment generator. And many of those jobs are good quality jobs because they're jobs with teach people modern attitudes, which teach people how to function in an efficient way, to work to a schedule, all of those modern attitudes that are so important. So I think tourism is our greatest untapped opportunity as a country, as a job generator, as a generator of economic activity. We need the country to look, in a sense, like Goa, to be an attractive place for millions of people to come and holiday and spend their money and put millions and millions of people to work in good quality jobs. Now, on the supply side, there is much that we can do. We have to improve the quality of primary education. We have to improve the quality of secondary education so that most people stick around in secondary education and come out so that they are in a position to then go off and work in jobs that require, let's say, 10 standard pass, 12 standard pass, as many of these even menial jobs sometimes ask for. And then we need to work on skilling programs. We have skilling programs in the country, but again, our skilling programs are oriented to sectors like manufacturing where we're not creating jobs. Our skilling programs need to be oriented to the sectors where we are creating jobs. So they need to be oriented towards construction. They need to be oriented towards service sectors, household work, etc., where we are creating jobs. So I think there are opportunities, big opportunities that we have, both on the demand side in terms of job quality and on the supply side in addressing education and skill levels so that people are then in a position to participate in the modern economy much more productively and effectively.
Thanks, Naushad. You have the chapter on innovation is something I read very, very carefully. And by way of your own journey as a student at Stanford, undergraduate, master's, and your doctoral research, and followed by this very long experience in industry. And now this is a subject on which you have clearly thought a lot. You've given it a lot of thought.
It's sort of my subject, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and there are two subheadings which really caught my attention, and I thought about it, and I said these are really the two key things as far as innovation is concerned. And there's a third one to which there's an independent question. So one subheading reads, why industrial R&D lags in India? And another one which reads, why does Indian industry invest so little in R&D? Could you please elaborate for those who join us?
So it is very much one of the big themes in the book. It's the area that I feel the greatest competence to write on. In many of the other areas, I'm sort of an interloper, but this area I feel pretty confident about. Here are the overall numbers. Indian industry invests 0.3% of GDP in in-house R&D. Yeah? The world invests 1.5%. That's also the rate in China. In other words, for us to match the world, to match China, Indian industry would need to scale its investment in in-house R&D by a factor of 5. That's not a small factor, right? 5 times as much as we do now. Now, why is it that we invest as little as we do in in-house R&D? Because we have an abundance of talent available in the country, unlike many other countries, most other countries, in fact. We have this abundance of talent. So we have the single big availability that you need to be able to invest more in R&D and get more impact from R&D in the country. Why don't we do more of it? I've tried to look at this from various angles. And I think the explanations fall in three buckets. First, there are certain sectors that are very R&D intensive. And some of those sectors are missing in India. Some are present, some are missing. If you take the top 10 sectors, for R&D worldwide, R&D intensive industries worldwide, out of the top 10 sectors, India has a reasonable presence in 3. So we have a reasonable presence in pharmaceuticals, we have a reasonable presence in auto and auto components, and we have a reasonable presence in software, right? We're completely missing in 5 out of the sectors. So 5 out of the top 10 sectors, we do not have a single firm in the top 2,500 R&D investors in the world. What are those 5? I'm not sure I'll be able to remember all 5 offhand, but technology hardware, electrical machinery, other industrials sort of in general, material science, and there's a 5th one which I can't remember. But there are 5 sectors where we don't even have one firm in the top 2,500. We have one chemical firm in the top 2,500 investors in R&D worldwide. So we really have some sectors that are missing in terms of vibrant, competitive industry in the country. And that's one of the reasons why we then have less overall industrial R&D spending in the country. Second reason, within some of these sectors, we invest too little. My favorite example is the IT services business. We have firms in the top 2,500, but we still invest too little. The top 10 IT services companies in India invest 1% of turnover in R&D. The top 10 IT services companies in China invest 8%. Now, why is there that huge difference? These are IT services to IT services, right? Why that huge difference? If you go and talk to, and you talk to our IT services companies, they think they're investing a lot. So, right? So, and it's true. I mean, 1%, it's 1% of a big number, right? But it's a lot smaller than the 8% of a big number in China, right? So the third reason, that I've come to as the real reason, if you like, we don't know that we're investing too little in R&D. And that's, I think, really applies across industrial sectors. So the first reason, if you like, we're missing in some of the most technologically dynamic sectors. The second reason is that within some of those sectors, we invest less than we should. And the third reason is that we don't know that we're investing very little in in-house R&D and that there's a huge opportunity. So one of the things that I've been pushing is do a benchmarking analysis. Look at how much one is spending on R&D as a firm, compare it with the top 10 or 20 firms in your industry worldwide, right? Ask the question, percentage to percentage of sales, how much are you investing in R&D? How many people do you have in R&D versus what these other firms have? And you won't get this data for every firm, but I'm sure you can get it for 1 or 2, right? And what's the result? What's the outcome? How many new products do you release each year? Take the last 3 years. How many new products have come out? What share of what do you do with those products? Do you sell them only in the country? Do you export them around the world? Get some sense as a benchmarking exercise to know how one's own R&D capabilities compare with the best firms worldwide. I think when one does that, then I think a lot of firms will say, okay, we have an issue, let's address the issue. And I think as we start to address the issue, as we start to build out our R&D teams and our R&D capabilities, I think we start seeing potential. You'll start seeing a pipeline of new products coming out the door. You start seeing the ability to enter new markets. You start seeing the ability to sell at a much higher margin, so you end up with a much more profitable firm. You start seeing the ability to actually export. everything starts changing. It doesn't happen overnight, but that dynamo of change with the availability of talent that we have in our country is a huge opportunity for Indian industry. And it's one that I think we must take. That's what that chapter and a couple other chapters is also all about.
Dr. Forbes, a related question perhaps is, here we are looking at how much does industry spend in R&D. In countries across the world, governments are also huge spenders as far as R&D is concerned, right? And in fact, they probably, I'm not sure about this, they probably lead the way, at least in certain sectors.
So if you look at R&D spending worldwide, and it's true that when countries first start developing, the state moves first. So you see state R&D spending going up first, and then at some point in time, industry starts taking off. So for example, I give the example of South Korea, which between 1970 and 1990 transformed its R&D system. In 1970, the state accounted for over 80% of total national R&D. By 1990, Korean industry accounted for over 80% of R&D in the country. If you look at the overall worldwide numbers, industry accounts for over 70% of all R&D spending. So actually, worldwide today, industry is the dominant spender on R&D. Second comes universities. Second comes higher education. And that's the second big source. And somewhere between 15 and 25%, I think the average is 17 or 18% now worldwide. And last comes government autonomous R&D laboratories. Now, for us as a country, unfortunately, it's the exact inverse. The largest share of spending happens in autonomous government R&D laboratories, the DRDO labs, the Department of Space, Department of Atomic Energy, CSIR. And there are some CSIR labs in Goa as well. These are the dominant places where R&D spending happens. Over 50% of national R&D spending in India happens in autonomous R&D labs, against, let's say, around 10% worldwide. So very different. Industry in India accounts for around 35% of national R&D spending, against over 70% as the average worldwide. And the higher education sector in India accounts for 7% of national R&D spending, against typically, I think, an average of 17%, and a range of 15 to 25% worldwide. So we have to correct all of this. I'm not saying we have to shrink the government spending, but what we have to do is relocate the government spending into higher education and industry. So let the government spend, but do in industry and in higher education. That's how it's done worldwide, by and large. And industry needs to invest a great deal more in in-house R&D. Those are the two big changes we need to bring about in our research and innovation system in the country.
Thanks. This next question draws from a story which you tell in your book about a discussion that is taking place among a few prominent economists, including Nobel laureate Kenneth Arrow and a couple of other people, senior academics. All you mentioned are we're on the older side, 70s, 80s. And the discussion, as you put in your book, is about why the United States, the universities really take off in the post-Second World War period, become world-class, begin to attract talent from all across the world. And the answer by one of the people there was that Adolf Hitler chased out all these leading academics from Germany, from the rest of Europe, and they came to the United States, and that's how things really took off. Now, in a completely different context, from 1930s Germany to, say, post-independent India, 60s onwards, especially, we have, without doubt, managed to chase away. Chase away may not be the most appropriate word, but chased away hundreds, thousands of people to the US, to the UK, and elsewhere for their higher studies. This is homegrown talent we are talking about. At that time, at least, people did not go abroad for undergraduate education. They mostly did for graduate school, right? So you do your schooling here, you do your college here, and then go off to the US or UK and then get employed there. Now, so, okay, this is a problem of brain drain, but to what extent? I mean, can we even possibly measure the damage done up to today in terms of the kind of impact this talent could have had on innovation? One could say that, if they had stayed behind, they would not have been able to achieve what they achieved as individuals. And individuals always operate in a context. So is it even possible to measure the harm done in terms of wealth, but innovation?
Actually, there were in the 70s and 80s, there was an actual attempt made, an international attempt, I think under the auspices of the United Nations, to actually try to measure the effect of the brain drain. And Jagdish Bhagwati was involved with it and wrote a book on it and so on. I don't think it's a very fruitful area, honestly. I think look at what, I don't think we chased our intellectuals away, by the way. That was the difference with Germany, in the 30s. In Germany, people left because they were under threat of losing their lives or ending up in concentration camps otherwise. I mean, in India, people left for economic opportunity. And I think they left because of this call we took to locate our research expenditure of the state in autonomous R&D institutes. If we put that research expenditure into our educational institutions, we would have created much more affluent educational institutions where research was a much bigger part of what was going on. And that single thing, more than anything else, would have kept a lot of people engaged and back in the country. And it still can. It can become a huge magnet and attraction for people to actually come and work here. The reason that someone goes off and does their PhD and then works in the US in some university or in Germany in some university is because the work in that particular field that they find so attractive is not happening anywhere in India. It's tough to get funding, etc., for that particular subject. They don't have anyone to talk to who's working in that same field. And so you're attracted to where that work is going on. Something that we can fix easily by relocating that R&D, that research spending into the higher education sector from these government labs. That's the first thing we can do. The second thing is a more subtle, softer, and wider thing, which is we have to welcome all comers. We have this perverse law that prevents the IITs and the IIMs from hiring a foreign faculty member. I think the IIMs now have changed. But as far as I know, the IITs still have not, right? You can get someone to come as a visiting faculty, but you can't appoint permanently someone who has a foreign passport. If we want the best and brightest in the world,
OCIs.
Sorry?
They can employ OCIs.
They can employ OCIs, which was a big step forward when we allowed that. We said OCIs can come, they count as Indian citizens, etc. It was a big step forward when that happened in the 2000s. But we should, what's our number one constraint in higher education? It's a shortage of faculty and a shortage of qualified faculty. If people from Poland and Thailand and wherever want to come and teach and work in India, we should say, hey, listen, here's a welcome mat. Because we as a country will only benefit from being an attractive destination for people to come to India. There's also a further factor, which is how welcoming are we of foreign input, foreign ideas, foreign engagement. And I think we were more in the 60s. I think Nehru especially was very open. He sort of gathered intellectuals from around the world who would come and visit, and he'd have this engagement with them and so on. We've become more closed, I think, to foreign intellectual input And I think we should embrace it. We should have complete confidence in our own culture that, that the more open we are to the rest of the world, the more we will benefit, the more our own culture will be enriched by these inputs. And we should have enough confidence that, our culture is deep-rooted and strong enough that this will only enrich, it will not displace.
We are happy to take questions from the audience. You can just type out your questions and we'll take them at the end, because I'm coming to my last question, which is actually 2-3 parts. So it might take 5 to 10 minutes. So the last question is very straightforward on higher. It's not a straightforward question, but it is specifically on higher education. Immensely enjoyable to read about your Stanford experience with the historians Gordon Wright, Stanford President Gerhard Casper, and your own supervisor Jim Adam. But and you write in the book, and this is something you refer to an earlier article that you had written, where you acknowledge that India's higher education is a system with deep problems but large potential. The worry is that 10 years later, another 10 years later, we might still say the same thing, But the two issues that I would really like you to take up is the quality of education challenge, and with reference to the massification of higher education. The expression that's been used is that India is in the early stages of massification at about 30% gross enrollment ratio. Now, recently, the government announced that the digital university will be a big step forward in that direction, and that it will help us achieve 50% gross enrollment ratio. Now, the question is this: unless there's substantial improvement in the quality of education, and whether we see online education as an answer, as a solution or not, and to what extent, but really, what can really be done to improve the quality of education? Because the biggest drawback there, and you mentioned primary and secondary education earlier, the biggest drawback there is that schooling is poor quality. So by the time students come to college, they are ill-equipped to actually cope with college, right? So you have this growing disease, in a sense, and I borrowed this expression from a 1970 article, the diploma disease, right? Where everybody gets a degree, but those degrees do not have any actual market value, right? I mean, to put it that way. So this also lends to, as we talked about earlier, the mismatch between jobs that are available and those who are looking for jobs. So what can be done? What are the possible answers? I mean, we don't have all the answers, but what would be the steps to take? Second, tell us more about your Uci University project.
Sure. So I'll come to that later. First on the quality problem. The diploma disease was a book by Ronald Daw that came out in the maybe late 70s, as you said. And Ron Daw was writing about Japan. So we're not unique in having a quality problem in our higher education system. And Ronald Daw there's a wonderful line in Diploma Disease where he says, there's this pyramid, the Japanese higher education system, he said, and he's talking about it at that time. It's improved since then, but it's still a pyramid today. He says where you have the University of Tokyo on top, and then you have a cascading set of institutions right down to private sector institutions where I think there's this wonderful line where he says, some of these private sector institutions would admit an intelligent chimpanzee if its parents made a large enough donation to the trust fund. Yeah. So this is true in many parts of the world, right? And in a sense, I would say my reaction would be, don't worry about it. Let the system sort itself out, right? As long as the state, as long as the taxpayer is not paying for this widespread, low quality private education system, and as long as you have individual citizens who are willing to pay for that education, let it happen, right? How do you sort it out? How do you improve quality? Well, there is a role for the state, and the role of the state is to actually assess quality, to assess certain minimum standards, and to do so through various agencies as we've set up, like the NAC, for example, the National Academic Assessment Council, which does assess universities on their quality. However, what we shouldn't do is to try to regulate quality into the system. So too often, the state tries to be very prescriptive. It says you need so many acres of land, you need XYZ, facilities, you need this kind of ratio, etc. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're so prescriptive, you don't actually end up with quality. What you end up with is check the box governance, right? So the state, if you ask me, oversteps its role when it comes to higher education in prescribing what input metrics you need in higher education. It also oversteps its role in prescribing this is what you must charge. Then it prescribes who can be admitted. Then it prescribes who can be employed. I mean, listen, and then it says the institute is autonomous. Now,
right. Let's not talk about autonomy.
Yeah. So I mean, so wait a minute, right? It's one or the other. It can't be both, right? So, and I'm not talking about union government. This is union government and state governments, right? Of every political party, right? So I think there's a real need for the state to step back from all of these areas and focus its efforts on just a few things. It should focus its effort on assessments and making those assessments public so that students and parents know which institute is good and why is it good. And then they make their choice of where to send their kids. Let institutes charge the fees that they wish. Provide a loan guarantee scheme instead of subsidies. Provide a loan guarantee scheme so that at least for professional fields, individuals can go off, study, get an education, go to work, and then repay those loans. You have a transparent system which can be much more fair than this system that we have now, where you prescribe the fees and then you have capitation fees which are paid in cash to the trust associated with the college. And so you can't borrow because it's a payment in cash. I mean, it's an unfair system that we end up with when we have all the right motive of limiting, making things affordable. So I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of getting the role of the state right in the higher education system. And if we do, I think we can dramatically improve quality. What do we need to rely on? We need to rely on autonomy, true autonomy. Autonomy means admit anyone you wish, charge whatever fees you wish, but make it transparent how much you're charging, right? Set the standards that you wish. You decide which fields you offer. You decide what goes into the teaching of your courses, etc. And the state will play a role only of assessing quality. And then competition. And competition is increasingly delivering in India as we speak. What are we seeing? In Maharashtra, where we saw huge increases in the engineering seats that were available. In the last 5 years, Maharashtra has not been able to fill a quarter of all its engineering seats.
The same story in Goa, even though there are very few colleges.
Right? This is very healthy. This is very healthy because it means that colleges will have to compete on quality to be able to fill their seats. That's very, very healthy. It'll take a couple of years, but as it comes out in the wash, what you'll end up with is better quality education with enough competition, but then free the institute, give them the autonomy to charge what they wish, grow enrollment in computer science, reduce enrollment in civil engineering, let them do what they wish. That will meet market demand, that will truly be autonomy for the institute itself. So that competition plus autonomy combination is the way to raise quality, not regulation. That's the big message in that chapter. Oh, sorry, on the CI University Project. So the CI University Project is very much of a passion. It's a personal passion. And a group of us got together now about 4 years back. We've been meeting now a couple of times every month for these 4 years. We've got a good project together. The intention is to launch from next year in Hyderabad under the Telangana University Act. And the intention is to do a world-class full-service university that's entirely industry funded. So we're paying for the land, we're paying commercial rates. We don't want any funding from the state. The goal is to provide over time. We'll start with public policy in the first year, then move to a 4-year undergraduate program, then widen to other fields. We'll start with the humanities, social sciences, and physical sciences because those are less well served in the country. Engineering and management is better served, if you ask me, in the country. There are lots
and newer institutions have also come up.
And many new institutions too. And I think over time, we can build a really good university, in the country. We need many. We have some new, nice private institutions that have started: Ashoka, Kriya, Plaksha, Ahmedabad University. These are, I think, great examples of new private institutions that are trying to do a good job. We need many more. We need 100 in the country. We need 100 great universities. So this is our attempt to do this. And the goal is one of the differentiators is actually going to be talent. So CAI members work with schools all around the country. Many of those schools are in disadvantaged areas. And very often, the way in which affirmative action works is that you reduce standards after the fact. We're trying to turn this on its head and say that, listen, since we work with schools, can we work with schools when kids are 12, 13 years old, identify the really bright kids, and then provide them with whatever inputs they need when they're 12, 13, 14, 15, such that they can then get into the university on merit. And what we've said is that anyone who gets in on merit can come to the university. It's needs blind, and we will find them funding, either loans or grants, so that, and we would expect about half the student body to need and get some kind of financial support, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what India is all about. We're about talent. If we can tap into the best students in our 1.4 billion people, we can build the best university in the world on that single factor.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great and a fantastic initiative. All the best for that. And we'll just take a couple of questions from the audience. This is from Gautam Chakrabarti. Dr. Forbes, a lot of things you have mentioned seem symptoms. The real disease is quality leadership at key levels, in my opinion. What can be done in that direction? The word, Dr. Forbes, which is often used is, and I think Professor Vikram Patel, who lives in Goa at times, he's written a couple of newspaper articles, and I have come across other popular articles. People often talk about political will, leadership coming in the way. And I have always wondered, as somebody who studied political science, is that political will is always needs to be pushed by the people, so to say, right? I mean, in elections, through protests, whatever form. So, how would you answer this question about leadership at all levels, and the question of political will?
I mean, clearly any institution benefits from good leadership. Political leadership, leadership of industry, leadership of NGOs, leadership in the bureaucracy, in the civil administration, in a higher education institution. Leadership matters everywhere. But I don't think we can wait for an improvement in the quality of leadership. I think actually there is reasonably good leadership in many, many different areas. What we have to do is to get the right balance in place between policy, industry, institutions. Too often, we want a really strong visionary leader who will solve all our problems. I think that's wrong. We should seek many better leaders in every possible institution and hope that they will operate as independently as possible and collectively take us forward, as opposed to relying on some one visionary, strong leader. So I'm not a believer in strong visionary leadership at the national level. At the individual institution level, I'm all for visionary leaders. But I want a country where we have thousands of visionary leaders, each leading their individual institutions, their companies, their bureaucracies, their schools, their colleges, their court system, whatever, right? And their political leadership too. I think that, to me, is much more India. I don't want to be like China with or Russia, with some. Okay, if you let's say China, I don't want to rely on the visionary leadership and strength of one person. I want to rely on 1,000 great leaders around the country. To me, that's much more productive. That's what we should set up structures, it seems to me, where that's how the system takes us forward. It's each individual playing their part, each institution playing their part, which collectively takes us forward.
Because we do have thousands of institutions and all of them need to work. And
very heterogeneous, very heterogeneous. You take the higher education system that we were talking about. We have the world's most heterogeneous system. We have, public system, private system, sort of in-between system, central system, state system. I mean, it's this extremely diverse, heterogeneous system. I mean, the last thing to sort out the higher education system, for example, if we said, listen, we'll have one higher education czar that will sort out the system, wrong solution, right? Let competition and autonomy sort out the system. It's much more automatic and it will be much more fruitful, it seems to be, than relying on some visionary leader who will sort out the whole system for us.
I think we'll just take one very short question, which is, I smiled a bit when I read the question, but I think it's still worth answering. Do you think India will be the third largest economy in the world by 2030? This is from Naru Gopal Maiti.
Sure. So, first of all, what does it mean when we say third largest economy, right? So the US is currently the world's largest economy at $20-some trillion. China's second at about, what's the number? 14 trillion, 14 trillion dollars. And Japan is third at a little over, I think it's at around what, 5.5, 6 trillion. Germany is fourth at what, 4.5, 5 trillion, and then we're fifth at around just under 3 trillion, right? So without question, we're going to grow faster than Germany and Japan in the next 8 years. I mean, unless we do some things that are really, really stupid, we will grow faster than Germany and Japan in these next 8 years. Will we grow fast enough to be more than, say, $7-8 trillion by 2030? I would hope so. So by 2030, I think almost surely we will be the world's third largest economy. But here's my point, which I make in the book. We should set ourselves a higher aspiration than that. And our aspiration should be that we grow at 9% a year for the next 20 years, because then in 20 years' time, we will be as rich as a country as China is today. And I think that should be our minimum goal. That in 20 years' time, we should at least be as big an economy and as rich an economy as China is today. China is not going to obligingly stay still while we catch up. But at least let's be in 20 years where China is today. And then we will have a dynamo in place such that in the next 10 or 15 years, we will catch up. But I think that should be our goal. So we need to actually be well ahead of being the third largest economy by 2030. We need to grow significantly faster so that we're on that trajectory of catching up with the rich world.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes, Naushad. I think it's about time, about 60 minutes over. So please do read the book. You can also see it behind Naushad's screen, but I'm holding the book and it's been marked and folded in several places. So it took a while. The last few days I have been busy reading it. Naushad, I learned a lot listening to you, and I think it's a great read. It's a book which covers several aspects of India's economy, leadership, innovation, education, personal stories, lots of them, a few Lakshman cartoons as well. So it made for a very, very pleasurable read. And thank you for doing this, for taking the time to join us. And I hope I'll be able to invite you successfully to Goa sometime in the next few months. We'll find a good reason to do that. And I look forward to that.
Thank you very much, Pushkar. It was a pleasure talking, and it'll be an even greater pleasure coming and visiting you in person in Goa. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.